Hey everybody, welcome back to the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. I'm your host, GORDO Gambles, and welcome back to another full card breakdown. This time for UFC San Antonio. You're right, we are out of the Apex non-pay-per-view card, but it's still not a bad one, especially from DraftKings purposes. I have a lot of stuff to cover, so I say we jump right into it. Please, before we do so, hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel. Let's do this. First fight of the night, we have the 135 Clash of Titans in Vidal 7-1, Haley Cowan 7-2. Cowan supposed to fight Perez. I was on Perez big. Now we got a weird matchup here. Two fighters I'm not super high on. Two fighters who I think are just brutes and have out-physicaled people in the regional scene. But in this matchup, when we're looking at their styles, I like how someone who is that former gymnast, who is a bigger girl, likes to bully girls in the clinch, but her biggest flaw is that sub-defense. Her striking's mid, her wrestling's mid. Top control is pretty good, her clinch game's pretty good. And she lacks that submission game. Vidal, very forward pressure, throws very, very heavy from the hip with power, decent submission game, wrestling, okay. To me, it just doesn't seem like a matchup that I want to be too heavily invested in. When I think from a DraftKings perspective, not one that thinks going to end too early inside the distance. When I think from picking a side, not one where I feel too confident backing either fighter long term. And for that reason, I don't know if I want to have any play on this at all. If we're forced to pick a winner, though, I think Haley Cowan's a bit more technical and has the ability to implement her game plan a bit more. Push her up against the cage, implement a few strikes from there, dirty boxing, take her down a couple times. If she minds her P's and Q's for Vidal's power and submission game, I think she has more minute-winning ability in this spot, especially being in Texas. She will have those judges in her back pocket as well. We saw some questionable calls last week. I wouldn't be surprised to see some more here. Again, not a fight I want too much interest in, but I do think Haley Cowan should be favored here. If you got any plus money on her, good for you, but 8.4 on DraftKings. Her path to victory doesn't seem to be the highest scoring one. And sure, Vidal could go out there, get another finish, score another 109 points. I do not think it's very likely, in my opinion. Of course, could always happen. She's a good contrarian GPP play because it should be lower owned, but not one I'm going to be too invested in this weekend. Next up, this is a very, very fun fight. 14-4, Vinicius Salvador, 11-2, Victor Altamirano. And Vinicius Salvador was supposed to fight Daniel da Silva, which would have been an absolute barn burner. We'll talk about that guy later. But now we get a really fun matchup, one that's lined 50-50, minus 110, actually minus 115, a bit favored towards Vinicius Salvador. And we have ourselves a very, very fun fight. I'm going to go out on a limb here with maybe a controversial opinion here, but I do think this is the fight you need to nail if you're going to be winning on DraftKings this weekend. I think this is a very close fight, but I do think this winner scores very, very well. On one side of things, you have Vinicius Salvador. The guy is just all gas, no brakes, all power. 17 of his 18 fights have ended inside the distance, including a 100% finish rate, 14 of them by stoppage, which is pretty incredible. The guy melts people. He's got insane power, which is not usual for the 125 division. He has a decent sub game in his own right, but he wants to walk you down and throw heavy. There's no doubt that he throws with power, but I don't think he's the most minute-winning equity here. I think his style really revolves around getting someone out of there early. Like I said, never won a decision. He is a guy who seems to fade later down on the stretch, and although he does have that power to get anybody out of there, in this matchup here, I don't think he has any minute-winning equity. Other side of things, Victor Altamirano likes to wear on people over time. He has a very good ability to use his volume, use his durability just to pressure people and break them down the stretch. So it seemed to be a very fun, stylistic matchup. Vinicius Salvador is going to have the moment-winning ability. The guy who can go out there, he can knock you down at any point. We did see Victor Altamirano can be stunned, but he showed decent recoverability. And if Vinicius doesn't get him out of there early, I think Victor Altamirano gets him out of there late. He has that style that's just not going to let Vinicius breathe. He's going to be always on him. Decent takedown game in his own right, but he is going to throw volume. And in this minute versus moment winner, I do think that Altamirano has more success in the long run and does score well with the win. In my opinion, it's even Vinicius early or Altamirano late, and even doing so, both of them should score very well. Whether it be that volume-based approach of Altamirano late or an early finish for someone like Vinicius, the winner should score well in DraftKings. So I do really want to target this. The under might even be a good look as well here in this fight. But I like Altamirano. I think he is a guy who should be favored in the spot. Sure, you always have that ability for Vinicius to hit that knockdown, knock him out, get him out of there, but Altamirano's shown that he can recover pretty well. I think he is the better minute winner. I think he has more paths to victory in the spot, and I think that his style plays better than Vinicius is in this matchup. I also think that Altamirano has the ability to make it to the scorecards if it goes there. I don't know if Vinicius' cardio is necessarily there yet. So the pick for me is going to be Victor Altamirano, but he will have to mind his P's and Q's on the feet against someone like Vinicius Salvador. Next up, we have the 13-2 Manuel Torres versus the 16-5 Trey Ogden. This is another fun matchup. Manuel Torres is a guy who is just he's just a first-round finisher. We've seen this a couple times already in this fight, just like Vinicius Salvador, just like Daniel Silva talk about. Manuel Torres is also a round one or bust type of guy. He's had 15 fights, 4 of them have ended in the very first round. And guess what? The one who didn't end in the first round ended up being a decision. He fights like he's double parked out front. He wants to get in. He wants to get out. He has power to do so. And I think that he is a still young, improving fighter here. Trey Ogden doesn't seem to be that type of finisher in his own right. He's a guy who wants to use his wrestling to wear you down, decent submissions down there as well, and he wants to break you down the stretch. He's able to do that by beating someone in Zellhuber last time out as a huge underdog, pull off that upset. But when we're looking at paths to victory and what we see to be the most likely outcome, sure, I see a slim chance where Trey Ogden is able to go out there, land takedowns at a high clip, wear on Torres, test his gas tank, and really extend him. But the most likely outcome is Torres is going to be winning the striking exchanges. I think Trey Ogden is a decently durable dude, but there's no question that Manuel Torres has enough power to put anybody out. And I do think he's able to do that against Trey Ogden, a guy who isn't the most defensively sound, a guy who isn't the best striker overall. And as long as this fight plays out in the feet, I'm going to have to favor Manuel Torres. So the question remains, does Trey Ogden shoot takedowns, and can Manuel Torres defend them? In my opinion, I think he defends them more than he doesn't. So give me Manuel Torres to win this fight with his power, his striking, and I think he is able to get an early finish. Of course, if he's not able to do that, he might be able to wear down the stretch. He's not the guy we've seen be tested too much, right? He's really green, he's inexperienced, and although he is getting these first round finishes against a very questionable level of competition. So although he is getting an appropriate step up, I do think he passes the test. He put that power to use, and in return is a decent DraftKings target at 8.5. I think a perfect contrarian play, though, is Ogden. I don't think he'd be very, very high owned at all. And at 7.7, his path to victory would probably include melting Torres with takedown after takedown after takedown. We've also seen Torres finish in both of his losses, so a very, very good contrarian play. I'm actually going to have a bit of ownership on this fight. However, the pick is going to be Torres by KO. Next up, 11-4, Daniel Lacerda versus the 10-4-1 CJ Vergara. I love Daniel Lacerda, and it's so funny to me because this guy isn't going to be winning belts anytime soon. Actually, he's 0-3 in the UFC, but I do think he's really talented. There's just one big problem with him, and that is his cardio. That is his ability to be extended, and it's so funny. He is a perfect DraftKings fighter to target because if he goes out there and he wins, it's going to score 120, 130 points, no question. But if he loses, which he does often, it's going to also be a high-scoring loss as well. Now, I said Torres fights like a double parks out front. I think Lacerda fights like he just robbed a bank and he's trying to get out of there as fast as he can, man. Every single one of his fights, but one, has ended in the very, very first round. Every fight has always ended under 1.5 rounds. That's his style. He's a guy that goes out there, balls to the wall, kill or to be killed style. And unfortunately for him in the UFC, it has gotten him killed. He's been finished by Molina, Francisco Figueiredo, and Victor Altamirano. And now he's facing a guy in CJ Vergara. And I do not think CJ Vergara is a world beater by any means, but I think he is a durable fighter who is able to withstand that early onslaught. And that's all you need to do when you are trying to beat someone like Lacerda, is survive that early onslaught. Now, of course, you want ownership on this fight because on DraftKings, when you're 6.9K, Lacerda is going to be a guy whose ceiling is 130. He has probably the highest ceiling on the entire slate because of his fighting style. The problem is I am picking Vergara to win. I think Vergara is able to survive that early onslaught, but you need to have ownership of Lacerda in these big max entry tournaments because he does have high scoring potential. But what's the most likely outcome here? What's going to happen a lot of the time in this fight? Well, it's going to be Vergara survives round one, Lacerda starts to fade, and Vergara gets him out of there. He melts him. And the more I think about it, the more it seems evident. I mean, Vergara survived that early onslaught from Rodriguez, survived it from Audie Osborne, and he also survived round one against De Silva. What is De Silva going to do differently here in this first round to get him out of there? I don't know necessarily if he can, and I know there's always a chance. I'm just saying it's not a very likely option, and that's why Vergara's favor is so heavy here. Vergara should be able to go out there, capitalize on that cardio dump from Lacerda, and finish him later on, which is pretty disappointing because not lasting very long isn't a good thing usually, but if fights were only 5 minutes long, I think Lacerda could be a champion here, man. Him and Terrence McKinney, if they're at weight parity, those fights would be insane. But the pick is going to be Vergara. I think he melts Lacerda over the stretch, and in doing so could put up a decent DraftKings score in the process as well. Next up, 15-4 Trevin Giles versus the 10-3 Preston Parsons. And Trevin Giles is just the most inconsistent fighter in the UFC. This man has wins over Ryan Spann, Brendan Allen, Roman Dolidze, but he can't go out there and finish a fight against Zach Cummings, who he choked in the third round. Gerald Mearshart also choked him out in the third round. He seems to quite literally choke away these fights. And the problem is I think Giles is a decent overall fighter. He just seems to be a bit of a mental midget sometimes. And that's no discredit to him because his skill set as a whole is one I want to back in a fighter. I just think he makes these foundational errors that sometimes are going to go out there and cost him. So when you're going to come out here and ask me, are you betting on this fight? No. I will not be betting on this fight. If I do end up betting on this fight, please clip this and send it to me because I should not be betting Trevin Giles fights. Too inconsistent for my liking. But this is a fight I want on DraftKings because Preston Parsons, his opponent's a guy who is very, very front-loaded, a guy who is also very, very aggressive early on, and in all is a very, very good DraftKings player. I think every fight so far has included a very, very good DraftKings score. And in this fight, it is Preston Parsons because he does walk forward. He does shoot a ton of takedowns. He's always looking to just put so much pressure on you, you end up melting away. Put up 180 against Evan Elder last time, didn't give him any time to breathe here. And I think if Preston Parsons wants to win this fight, he will have to do that same thing against Trevin Giles. Now, Parsons, I think, is a decent offensive grappler. I mean, he almost choked out Elder so many times. Elder seemed to be really tough, but we've seen Giles put himself in these positions where he gets submitted pretty easily, where he makes these foundational errors on the mat that I think Parsons can capitalize on. That's why it's such a tricky fight to call. I think it's also why this fight is 50-50, -110, -110, because both of their paths to victory have holes in their games as well. I think Parsons isn't the best striker. He can be knocked out. I think Giles has decent power and decent foundational boxing. I think Giles can be submitted. I think he makes errors. I think Parsons has some decent offensive grappling in his own right. Who can get off their game plan? Will it be the striking, the strength, the foundational boxing of someone like Trevin Giles, who doesn't make any mistakes and finds himself back in the win column? Or will it be Parsons melting him over the stretch, getting those takedowns, trying to capitalize on any of those mistakes that Giles makes? It's a real toss-up, and gun to my head, my favorite expression, I think I'm going to pick Preston Parsons because I technically like those grapplers on DraftKings, but not a fight I want any financial investment in. Instead, I'd rather invest on probably Parsons on DraftKings, a little bit of Giles in there as well. To me, not a fight I'm going to have any bets on, but we'll probably have some ownership of Parsons due to that takedown upside. Next up, 19-10 Steven Peterson versus the 7-3 Lucas Alexander, and this is a difficult one for me because I don't think Steven Peterson is necessarily a world beater. I think his style is very beatable. I think when he faces this higher echelon of competition, he will be beat. But he's facing a guy in Lucas Alexander who I don't think is spectacular. A guy who, not only have we not seen him against that best level competition, but when he finally took that step up, he struggled, tapped out early, was finished. I think that the style of Lucas Alexander can take him over this lower level of competition that he's facing in the regional scene. But when you can't go up there, when you can't compete in brawls, when you can't show that same resiliency, when you want a super clean fight, that's not always what you're going to get. You're going to be walked down. You're going to be in a messy fight that Steven Peterson is definitely going to bring here. And in this spot, although I want to back Lucas Alexander because I think he is the better technical fighter, I see a ton of heart and resiliency from Steven Peterson, and I don't see that same thing from Lucas Alexander. Now, considering I don't think that both these guys like it to be on the ground, I think it's going to be a 15-minute striking affair. And when I think about, okay, who has more finishing potential, it's probably Peterson because he's been super durable. I don't see Lucas Alexander putting his lights out. Well, is this going to be a boxing bout where the referee's going to step in every time they clinch and separate them, allow for a clean fight? No, and that's kind of what Lucas Alexander wants. He wants to keep it at range, use his technical ability, piece him up from the outside, and that's not what Peterson wants. I think in a technical bout, Alexander wins, but I do think Steven Peterson's able to walk forward, put pressure on him, really try to disfigure him out there and try to make things really dirty. I think he's able to do that. I think he's able to win the fight on that case, make Alexander uncomfortable, try to ruin his night that way, make him a bit bloody, make him make some mistakes, and I think that it's going to be one that goes to the scorecard, and I think Peterson's able to edge him out that way. Now, of course, I can see a world where Peterson can't get off his game, Alexander can stay around on the outside and win a decision that way, but to me, the most likely outcome is that brawl style that Peterson brings, and I do think he's able to bring it one more time here in the Octagon on Saturday. Give me Peterson for that reason, but not a fight I want really any interest in, not much finishing ability on my side, not much grappling. In a 50-minute striking affair, do not want either side, especially Peterson at 8.7, when there are so many good DraftKings scores this week. Next up, 27-14, Daniel Pineda versus the 12-2 Tucker Lutz. Another weird, questionable fight because Daniel Pineda is a guy coming off a 2-year layoff, has not looked good. He was on some stuff when he fought in his past, and he's not on those same drugs anymore. Let's put it that way. I said it, it's out in the air. Now that we covered that, what version of Daniel Pineda are we getting? Because I don't think Tucker Lutz should really be minus 300 over anybody, but the Daniel Pineda we saw against Andre Fili 2 years ago doesn't seem to be a type of guy I want to be backing in a UFC fight. And then when it comes down to the more reliable guy here, the guy who's going to fight for your money, probably the guy who's hungrier to win, is going to be Tucker Lutz. That's why he should be favored. I agree with that part. But we're thinking about overall paths to victory. The Daniel Pineda that fought 5-6 years ago would destroy Tucker Lutz. And that's really when we have to gauge what version of Pineda are we getting here. I think Tucker Lutz makes a lot of foundational errors and he comes out with his head high, can be hit. But yes, I do think Tucker Lutz is going to be the stronger wrestler and he has that path to victory over Pineda. Pineda does have some grappling in his back pocket, could try to throw something up on him, but I do think that if it gets to the ground, that's probably Lutz's world. Probably the end of fight for Pineda there. So it comes down to on feet. Do I know if Daniel Pineda's strike is necessarily there? I think he still throws with power. Power's the last thing to go. I think he still has that. And can he clip someone like Lutz, who I seem to be pretty reckless and make massive mistakes? Of course he can. And I think that's why the path to victory for Pineda is going to score very well at $7,000, probably a finish. But I have to agree with Lutz being the favorite. I think he has more path to victory. I think he's hungrier, and I think he is more reliable at this point in time. So give me Lutz to win this fight. Decent upside at 9.2 is just, with so many high scores this week, it's hard for me to get to him. I do think he wins, though, so I will be sprinkling in some ownership of him. Same thing can be said for Daniel Pineda, who does have some high scoring upside as well. Another fight I'm looking to target, but not one I see to be too reliably sold on from a moneyline perspective. On to the main card, the 22-8 Chidi Njokuani versus the 15-4 Albert Duraev. This is actually one of my favorite fights on the card. I think it's actually very, very fun. Chidi Njokuani, a guy who loves to brawl. He's got insane power. The man hits hard, just as Andre Barrio, a guy who's really durable, knocked him out with like his first couple punches he threw. He's also the guy responsible for busting up and creating that horrible gash on Gregor Rodriguez. If there's one thing that Chidi Njokuani has, that is a ton of power. He's getting a guy, though, in Albert Duraev, who is what I thought to be a Dagestani wrestler. A guy who wants to go out there, shoot takedowns, and try to brutalize you on the mat. He did that on Dana White Contender Series. He did that in the first couple of rounds of his fight against Kopylov, and then he struggled a bit against Joaquin Buckley. And I think that's kind of what people got in their mind is Duraev couldn't get off on his takedowns very well, couldn't control Joaquin Buckley. Who says he can control Chidi Njokuani? I think that's really what this comes down to, because there's no denying that Chidi Njokuani is the better striker. I mean, his 72% striking accuracy, 4.28 strikes landed per minute. The guy is a very, very good striker, and I think he has the power to really take care of someone like Duraev. But we have seen Chidi Njokuani taken down before, twice by Dusko, one a Dana White Contender Series, one by Gregory Rodriguez. Although he's a 75% takedown defense, if Duraev comes out there with a grapple-heavy game plan, I do think he's able to take down Chidi and potentially control him there. So again, another fight I'm very, very high on DraftKings. And again, I'll probably go over the end to talk to you about which ones I'm higher on than others, but this fight seems to have a lot of upside, whether it be the knockout or insane power that Chidi Njokuani has to score well. But I think at 7.4, I think Albert Duraev is very live in this spot. And that could come back to haunt me because he hasn't seemed to be the most reliable fighter. But if he goes out there, chain grapples together for 15 minutes and has the cardio to do so, I wouldn't be surprised if he got a finish. I wouldn't be surprised if he got him down, took his back, and was able to implement some damage on Chidi Njokuani and try to beat him in the ground game. I think Duraev's a better ground fighter. I think Chidi's a better striker. And a striker versus grappler matchup, the grappler scores better on DraftKings. Simply put is that. This could also be a fight I'm looking to bet the under here. I think it is a violent affair. I think it is a very, very fun one. I'm actually going to pick Albert Duraev for the upset. That, again, may come back to haunt me. We know how good Chidi is on the feet, and he's probably able to piece up Duraev if it goes there. I think we're getting a little bit of recency bias here on the Njokuani side. People are forgetting how much of a beast Duraev looked like on Dana White Contender Series. I think he does have that foundational wrestling and grappling that he goes back to in this fight and is able to control Chidi Njokuani there. So a very close fight. I think the line should be a bit closer. Give me the dog shot at 7.4K. There is a lot of value on Duraev. We move on to the 24-7 Alex Perez versus the 18-6 Manel Kape. Alex Perez, let's see if he makes it to the cage. He has been a fun fighter, but he always pulls out of his fights, always cancels, struggled with weight, and has been finished really early in his fights that he has had. Manel Kape, 18-6. He's been active recently. After dropping his first two in the UFC, I mean, he's now got 3 wins in a row, and he's now facing a guy, Alex Perez, who is a former title contender. A guy who's going to put him and bolster him up into the higher echelon of his weight division. This is a big fight for Manel Kape. Now, despite me chirping Perez for not making weight, for missing fights, I think he is a decent fighter. Very good wrestling, some decent kicks from the outside as well. Very snappy that way too, and I think he is a guy who's going to contend at this weight division. He's fought a few buzzsaws recently, guys who have been able to outwork him. Pantoja just out-leveled him. And I think that although Manel Kape is very, very talented, he's still a step down from Pantoja and Figgy. So how does this fight play out? I think Alex Perez is going to have the more volume, the more wrestling options, and just the ability to outwork someone in Kape here, but Kape's going to be landing the more impactful strikes. Another minute versus moment winner, and although I do think that the moment winner has the ability to throw volume, I think he's the better technical striker as well, Manel Kape, I can't trust him at this price tag. He can be taken down, he can be controlled, he can be out volume, he can be outworked just like Nicolau Cowan, and although I'm saying a lot of bad things about Manel Kape, he is a great striker. He does have a lot of power. He does have some very good technical ability. He's going to have to fight a pretty perfect fight against Alex Perez, who I do think is decently talented and looking to come back in the right place here. Can Perez make weight? I hope he does, because I do think it's going to be a very, very fun fight. Gun to my head, if this was minus 110, I would pick Manel Kape because I think he's able to out-technical and implement more powerful shots and win the moments here on the judges' scorecards. I just think that the line is a bit wide in this case. Alex Perez could be a very, very good contrarian option, 7.3, although it's not like I haven't given you guys enough of DraftKings underdogs already. So give me Vidal Kape. Don't think I'll be parlaying him though. Next up, 13-6, Andrea Lee, 11-2, Macy Barber. Going to be short and sweet on this one. Not a fight I want too much financial investment on. Macy Barber's been a bit up and down. Andrea Lee's been a bit up and down. Both these girls I think have skills, but I need to see more from them. They have made foundational errors. The Rougeau loss for Lee wasn't very good. And then Barber has also not lived up to her full potential that I think she can. On paper, it's a fantastic matchup because I think that Barber landing 4.42, Lee landing 5.34. There could be some very, very good striking exchanges, lots of volume. Could be an entertaining fight. But who's going to be the one to go there and implement the wrestling or change things up in the clinch? I think Barber has more paths of victory to do so. But do I want to lay minus 275 on a fighter like Macy Barber, who I think sometimes fights down to level of competition or sometimes doesn't implement her full game plan, or someone who can be outstruck sometimes? Andrea Lee has very good striking, technicality, and defense. 64% striking defense. She's had the ability to win these close fights, and I think that this fight could be a lot closer than the line entails. On DraftKings, no thank you, because it's probably going to go to decision, and I've already talked about a lot of fights that I think are going to score higher. But from the betting side of things, this is kind of like the Kape-Perez fight. I think that, gun to my head, I would take Macy Barber, but this line is way too wide, leading me to kind of want to take a shot on Andrea Lee. I'm not saying she wins this fight at a high clip. I just think that she's able to win these striking exchanges, fend off the takedowns, implement some takedowns of her own higher than a plus 220 price tag indicates. So for me, a very, very close fight. Gun to my head, I'm picking Barber, but I do think that Lee is live as an underdog. Moving on up, 16-4, Nate Landwher, 9-1, Austin Lingo. Austin Lingo rebooked for the short notice affair against Nate Landwher. Nate Landwher, the biggest price tag on the DraftKings slate, something I thought I'd never say. Nate Landwher is a better underdog than he is a favorite, a guy who is a very, very good underdog. I don't think I have any better words than that. He fights for your money. He's always out there. He is a brawler. Lots of blood, good durability, lots of volume, averages 6.37 strikes landed per minute. The guy's fun to watch. He likes to melt people. That fight against Onama was a classic. He was able to melt Ludova Klein. The guy's talented. There's no question about that. But his style is another one of these melt you type of thing, where he tries to melt you for 15 minutes, where he likes to go out there and brawl. In a technical bout, he's not always going to be winning these striking exchanges. If his opponent doesn't gas, if he can't go out there and get his opponent's face, he's not always going to win these bouts. Additionally, Landwher can be hit, and he has been finished. He can be rocked. His chin isn't perfect. Although he is extremely durable, he has been finished. So where does that leave us here? Well, it leaves us with a fighter who, first of all, I don't want to parlay at this price tag, but one where I kind of think the dog is live here. And it's exactly like the fight before this, where gun to my head, I'm picking Landwher, but the line is wide. I think Lingo has a better shot than his price tag entails, and I think that on DraftKings, especially when you're telling me a guy in Austin Lingo, a guy who's never been finished before, a guy who has some decent boxing chops, is 6,800 against a guy in Nate Landwher, I think that there is some very, very good reasons to have Austin Lingo in your DraftKings lineup this week, and I kind of think I will be having him in my lineups, especially way more than Landwher, because I think at 9.4K, Landwher needs a ton of volume or an early finish to live off his price tag. I don't think he can necessarily get that at a high clip. To me, the value's on the dog, and at 6.8K, a guy who averages 6 strikes per minute, a guy who's never been knocked out, a guy who has some decent foundational boxing, I think Austin Lingo is live for not only an upset, but a decent DraftKings score. But what's the worst case scenario? Say Landwher is able to melt him over the stretch. Does that not allow Lingo to have 1, 2, maybe 3 rounds to work with at 6.8K? I think his floor is very high at this spot. Landwher is not a notorious round-one finisher. It's a really weird situation where, considering everyone around him, he does have a pretty high floor considering, and I think he is a guy I want to be targeting from DraftKings purposes at 6.8K, as you know, a cheap underdog to allow you to get these other plays in your lineup. So the same thing I said for my last two, though. Gun to my head, I'm picking Landwher. I think the line's wide. No money line bet for me. And I don't really want to break down this fight too much. 14-6, Holly Holm. 14-6, Yana Santos. Almost 41 years old. She's getting out there. I thought she won her last fight. Doesn't matter. She didn't perform the best of her abilities. She's going to want to go out there, clinch you up against the cage, and try to land some strikes in the clinch. And I think against Santos, she's going to be able to potentially do that. But I think Santos can be more dynamic, more explosive. And for that reason, do I want to lay the price tag on Holly Holm? Probably not. Not a fight I want too much ownership on. DraftKings-wise, 9K isn't very enticing either. Sure, she put up 132 against Aldana. Wasn't a 5-rounder. Last 3-round decision win was against Pennington. Scored 65. So not a historically good DraftKings score. Holly Holm, I think, is going to win this fight. I think she is able to implement her game plan, but not trustworthy at all. 9K is not very appetizing for me on DraftKings. Another one of these pass spots on the heavy favorite. Not much else to say. Then we move on to the main event, and this is a very, very fun main event. 22-7-1 Marlon Vera versus the 15-4 Corey Sandhagen. A contender matchup and a beautiful one at that. Marlon Vera is a guy who's been all action recently. He's been super fun to watch, and Corey Sandhagen's been at the top of the division for very good reason. I have had issues betting against Marlon Vera because I think he's a very talented fighter. I bet on him against Font, but I did have a small shot on Cruz decision only. I did have a small shot on Edgar. All to say that although Vera is a very, very talented fighter, he is a guy who can be outstruck, who can be out minute one, who can lose minutes, and who can also be taken down. Sure, he has power, he's able to build as the fight goes on, but he starts too slow in my opinion. And against a guy in Corey Sandhagen, I think Corey Sandhagen is going to have the ability to control range, out-volume him, win the minutes, and even implement some takedowns out there. I think Corey Sandhagen is the better overall fighter and should be winning this fight. But do I want to go against Marlon Vera in this fight? Probably not, because Marlon Vera seems to be on a roll. He seems to be making things work, making the proper adjustments, and he is improving as the fights go on. But I do think Corey Sandhagen is on the side here. I do think that the price tag is justified because I do think he wins this fight more than Vera does. I think path to victory-wise, Vera has that knockout power. He has the ability to build as the fight goes on, but I think Corey Sandhagen has the wrestling upside if he wants to go there, has the volume, has the ability to start fast and win the first couple rounds. I think if this does go all 25, starting slow could be detrimental to Marlon Vera. I think he was losing that Cruz fight. Of course, he landed it perfectly. He did a great job there, but I think if he's not able to get that same knockout shot against Sandhagen, he is going to struggle. That reason, I am picking Corey Sandhagen. How do I want this on DraftKings, though? I think Corey Sandhagen is a cash play because Vera's not going to go out there and finish early. He's a guy who builds down the stretch and score better as the fight goes on, allowing Sandhagen to accrue points at 8.6. And considering I do think Sandhagen wins, for that reason, I do think he is a better DraftKings play. Vera, though, has been on a bit of a roll. 95, 129, 94, 98. But he has gotten 7 knockdowns in his last fights. I don't think he's able to get that many here. I think he's going to be out-volumed by Sandhagen. Sure, he's a live underdog at 7.6 due to his power and just his overall improvements fight to fight. But I do think Sandhagen should be the favorite here, and Sandhagen is my pick to win. That's going to do it for me here on the Plays and Fades YouTube channel. Covered all 13 fights from a betting and DraftKings perspective. Let me quickly give you my quick picks. First of all, I'm taking Haley Cowan, but barely in that first event. Then I'm taking Victor Altamirano, taking Manuel Torres, CJ Vergara, Preston Parsons, but really a toss-up, Steven Peterson, Tucker Lutz, Albert Duraev, Manel Kape, Macy Barber, Nate Landwher, Holm, and Corey Sandhagen. There's a ton of fights this week that are very, very close, but also a ton of fights I'm targeting for DraftKings. Let me just say, fights to target as a whole, I think, are the Salvador Altamirano fight, Njokuani, Duraev, Vergara, Lacerda, and that main event as well. I think when we're looking at underdogs, I think Lacerda's path to victory scores very well. Doesn't think they get it that often. Lingo is going to be a very popular underdog for me, just because I think his floor is up there. I think he is better than that price tag entails, allows you to get up to a bunch of options. Duraev does have a good path to victory as well. I think Ogden is my contrarian play, but of course, I think Altamirano is my highest owned fighter there. Up top, with all those underdogs I mentioned, it allows you to get Vergara, allows you to get Lutz, allows you to get Torres as well. A ton of good options, and hopefully the information I've conveyed throughout the course of this video is helping you guys to win some money this weekend. If you guys want to show me some love, please hit the like button down below, subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, DM me on Twitter at GamblesGordo. It's right up there. Feel free to ask me any questions you may have, or even leave any comments you may have towards improving these videos or any thoughts on the fights in general. But with that, guys, we've done it all. 13 fights. Hope everybody enjoys them all this weekend. Let's make some money, guys.